Dear participants, thank you very much for joining us today. This webinar is part of CFRR awareness raising initiatives on sustainability reporting. My name is Svetlana Platon. I'm Senior Financial Management Specialist at the WorldBank Center for Financial and Sustainability Reporting Reform. Before we start, we need to follow the protocol and announce the housekeeping arrangements. Next slide, Katerina, please. So simultaneous interpretation is available today in Russian, Albanian, Bosnian, Croatian, and Serbian. Please press the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom meeting window and select your preferred language. To hear your language more clearly, please click Mute Original Audio. Your microphones and cameras are automatically muted and turned off during the entire event. For questions, please use the Q&A box instead of the chat. The most relevant questions will be selected and answered live during the webinar. Our event is being recorded and the recording will be available on CFRR webpage. You will receive a link once available. And I hope we are ready to start now. And I invite Fabian Schederer, Practice Manager, Institutions Global Department within the WorldBank, and Saskia Slom, Chief Executive Officer, EFRAG, for opening remarks. Over to you, Fabian.
Thank you very much, Saskia, Svetlana, and good afternoon, Europe. Good morning, US. It's great to see so many colleagues and counterparts connected from all over ECA. I think we have more than 180 people participating here, which really shows the importance. So it's really a great pleasure to welcome you today on behalf of the World Bank Center for Financial and Sustainability Reporting, which is based in Vienna, Austria, as most of you know. I'm delighted to welcome you to this series of webinars on advancing SME sustainability reporting. Because indeed there's a growing interest in Europe and around Europe and in candidate countries about this simplified standard. So this webinar will develop in two parts. It's organized under the CFRR program, which stands for Enhancing Accounting, Auditing and Sustainability Reporting, which is co-financed by the Austrian Federal Ministry of Finance, the Austrian Development Agency, and the Swiss State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, STECO. So great thanks to the partners for supporting this important program at this critical time. The sustainability reporting is no longer a niche practice. It is becoming a core expectations for businesses of all size, which form the backbone, and particularly SMEs, which form the backbone of our economies in most of ECA. So it's great to see that today we'll have a presentation about the voluntary sustainability reporting standards for SMEs, which has been developed by EFRAG and has been recently endorsed by the European Commission. So it's official, translated in all EU languages and accessible. Let me underline the voluntary nature of that, because the idea is really not to impose undue regulatory costs and burdens on companies that do not need that. And so that's a bit the voluntary nature of these times, which is very much welcome. We're proud to co-host this webinar with EFRAG, our trusted partner in advancing both financial and sustainability reporting reforms. I think over the years, our cooperation has grown stronger. There's participation in mutual events. Big thanks to Saskia Slomp, the CEO, and her team for this joint event, and also for participating on a regular basis to the CFRR events. As I just mentioned, we really consider her and EFRAG as part of the CFR family. So great to have them here today. Just a word maybe on the VSME standards. What's really unique about it, it's its simplicity, it's very practical, it's proportionate to the needs of smaller companies. And I think that's really its beauty. So the idea is really to have a positive cost-benefit analysis in terms of the compliance requirements and the benefits getting out of that. And the benefits are numerous because it really helps access to finance. We see a growing demand from banks, investors, large clients, financiers, even for bond investors, institutional investors who really see the downside risk of climate, right? And so that's important to have concrete data, validated data, to be able to respond to this information in a structured and systematic way. And so therefore, it really improves access to financing and maybe also the terms of access to financing. But also, and most importantly, I guess it enables SMEs to manage their own sustainability risks and opportunities more effectively. Oftentimes, we're a bit blindsided on these aspects. SMEs don't necessarily systematically have a risk management process in place that takes into account the growing risk from climate change. And I think we see many of these throughout the region. Extreme weather events, the extremity, the frequency of these events is increasing. The World Bank has just finalized a climate country diagnostic report for the Western Balkans, and it really shows the impact of climate change. It's estimated that without adaptation, it may actually lead to a loss of GDP of up to 9%, which is huge. And it's a recurrent loss. But also the adaptation costs are huge. They're estimated at $37 billion over the next 30 years. And so that really cannot be financed alone by the public sector. It needs to be a collective effort, particularly from the private sector. And that's why, I mean, if these standards help more granularly identify and manage sustainability risks, that is very helpful in that respect. But also, it does strengthen reputation and trust, and opens door for EU supply chains. I think many of the countries are either candidate countries or strong integrated in EU supply chains. And so they're, irrespective of the threshold, the final threshold of the ESRS, there's clearly a growing expectation from consumers to see the impact on the environment and the sustainability risks, right? So that's something which you see trickling down through the supply chains. And so while this VSME standard is not mandatory within the European Union, its relevance and its demand from consumers, from financiers, is growing. So the European Commission therefore recommends that large entities, which are not subject to the threshold of the ESRS, go for the VSME standard. And so that approach really signals a shift. Even though the standard is voluntary, it's quite likely adopted by an increasing group of companies. And so it's important to have a heads up. And so that's really what this webinar is doing, is to have a better understanding of these standards, but also of the tools that accompany these standards, and will make it easier for both companies and regulators to actually apply it in practice. And I think that's the beauty of that. So at the CFRR, we remain committed to supporting the regulators, the accounting profession, and the business association in this journey. So the adoption of VSME will not only align your practices with your expectations, but it will also empower SMEs to thrive in a sustainability economy and lead these adaptation efforts and green transition. It's also very relevant for state-owned enterprises, which oftentimes can be below the threshold of 1,000 employees fixed for ESRS, but which really should be the leader of the green transition for two reasons. One is they're often present in very brown sectors, energy, transport, and so therefore quite impacted by the downside risks of climate change. But they also equally have the opportunity to drive the transition in their respective sectors, right? By adapting new technologies and diffusing them. So that's also something we to discuss further in our SOE Committee of Practice and with the regulators and accounting professions of the CFR community. So the VSME standard includes two modules, a basic and a comprehensive one, that comes with this ready-to-use digital tools and templates, which we'll see today. So we're looking forward to that. And we'll have the opportunity to learn directly from the authors of the VSME, so ask all the questions you have, and we're more than happy to support you in its implementation should you choose to. Thank you very much, and have a good webinar.
Hi. So good afternoon. My name is Saskia Slomp, and like Svetlana said 2024. I'm the CEO here at EFRAG. I'm sitting here together with my colleagues of the VSME team, Elisa, Lorenzo, and Matthias is online, so he will join as well. So you will hear from them in much more detail about the VSME Standard. So we are very delighted to organize this jointly with the WorldBank and be called a trusted partner feels good. So thank you very much for that, Svetlana and Fabian Seidere, to invite us and to do this jointly and to reach out to countries where we perhaps are a bit less, if I'm allowed to say, familiar with. And we think it's really important to bring our VSME standard to your attention. So we are very glad to do that. I have actually no idea if many of you know what EFRAG is. So very, very briefly, perhaps EFRAG will have next year its 25th anniversary. So we are around a long time. And from 2001, we focus on financial reporting. So we became the technical advisor of the Commission in financial reporting. That means that we give endorsement advice on the international financial reporting standards. And in order to do so, we have to influence those standards. So we have a whole due process around that. Then since 2018, we were called upon by the Commission in one of the action plans. So financing sustainable growth to set up a European lab. So that are our first steps really in sustainability reporting. Then in the CSRD, EFRAG is assigned as technical advisor of the Commission, preparing draft standards. So the technical advice that we give to the Commission are draft sustainability reporting standards. Now, I think Fabian Seidere mentioned the Omnibus Directive, the proposals that are changing the CSRD. So this is now moving quite fast. At the end of February, the Commission announced those proposals. The Council, so that the Member States, has finalized their amendments, the proposed amendments. Also in the Parliament, the Legal Affairs Committee has now finalized this. This is still to be approved in what they call the plenary meeting. That will be at the end of October. And then something is starting that is called the trilogue, where both the co-legislators come together with the Commission. And in a couple of meetings, technical and political, they will come normally with an end result. Now, Fabian was referring to 1,000 persons, employees. This was originally in the Commission proposal. This has survived in the Council and is now as well, finally, in the Parliament proposal. So we can reasonably assume that this will be where they will end up in the compromise, so 1,000 employees. But I think that makes it even more important for your countries and also other EU countries to have this voluntary SME standard, because obviously where originally 50,000 people were under the first set of VSRS, it's now much reduced. So this is to say the importance for VSME has grown, but we have to be careful because our VSME standard was developed with 250 persons, employees in mind. So to what extent that can automatically apply to a company, say, of 999 employees is a big question. In the current text of the proposals, it's said that that these companies that are not in the scope, so that they have no obligation to follow the ESRS, the Commission will adopt a voluntary standard based on VSME. So we have to see what it will mean exactly based on. Then very briefly, perhaps to that as well, in the Omnibus proposals, they call for simplified standards. So EFRAG has been working very, very much on that. And we are now in the phase that we're analyzing all the comments that we received, both from the exposure drafts and the public consultation. And we have to deliver our technical advice. So that means 12 draft standards to the Commission by the end of November. And then by the end of December, we have also to deliver the cost and benefit analysis plus the basis for conclusions. Now, going back to VSME, the idea is that the VSME standard will help to replace actually all the multiple questionnaires. And I think Fabian was referring to the access to finance to make it easier in the supply chain, to make it easier for banks. This, of course, the standard remains voluntary, so we have to see if it actually can replace it. I think Elisa or The team will tell you a little bit more how they use all the questionnaires that are around. Perhaps one thing to mention as well is we are developing what we call an ESRS knowledge hub, and the VSME environment, the VSME ecosystem is an important part of that. Why do I mention it? In that knowledge hub, the VSME standard is made interactive. So all the references that you feel that you see there in between the text to other texts, you have to just a click and you get all the information. So it's made fully interactive. So that will be probably very, very interesting for you to have that as well. And I'm sure when it is out, and that should be out on the 4th of December when we have our hybrid conference, so you can also register for that conference. We will launch it there, and I'm sure that Svetlana will circulate that to you, the link, so that when our hub is out, then you have even more access to all the material that Elisa and Lorenzo and Matthias are going to introduce to you to give support for this very important standard. So thanks again. I hope also that I think Fabian told that it's available in all the EU languages. The WorldBank may also attempt to have it in non-EU languages, so that is very much appreciated. We can, of course, not check it, but we welcome the initiative very, very much. And I think the rest you will tell more, Elisa, Lorenzo, and Matthias. We have tools, we have everything to support, and we will develop further next year as well. So with having said this, I think my time is over. So Svetlana, I think you are going to introduce my colleagues. So thank you very much. I hope that you have a very informing webinar and ask all the questions you want. That is also important as part of it. Thank you.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you very much, Saskia, for all this updates. Definitely, we will circulate the link to your conference in December with our clients, and we'll encourage them to attend. By the way, I have already registered for this conference. Yes. So, dear friends, the session today will introduce the VSME standard, will explain its key principles, and will deep dive into basic and comprehensive models of the standard. And I am pleased to introduce our distinguished speakers today. Elisa Bevilacqua. Elisa is a senior technical manager at EFRAG and currently leading the work on the VSME standard. And also Lorenzo Baldini and Mattias Mingazzini, both junior technical managers at EFRAG. So dear EFRAG friends, over to you now.
Thank you very much. So I will start the presentation. We have the slides to share with you. I will start by telling you a little bit the story of the VSME. So the key features, the objectives, and the methodology and the process that we have followed. And then my colleagues, Lorenzo and Matthias, will deep dive into the modules so you can really get a feeling of the disclosure and the metrics. So let's start with the process. The VSME, as it was already reminded by the previous intervention, it really is a market-led standard. So it's outside the scope of the CSRD, at least certainly in the mandate that we have had and we received two years ago. The mandate of EFRAG stemmed from the SME relief package of 2023. So the clear intention was to alleviate and reduce the burden for SMEs in terms of providing a simple, standardized framework that would allow them to share the sustainability information in an efficient and proportional manner with their business counterparts. And also in that way, creating better opportunities for SMEs for sustainable financing or procurement ESG profiling. So this is the starting point of our work. And we have the clear objectives through this work to replacing the current multiple questionnaires, which are uncoordinating and represent a real burden for SME. So this is the relief point that we were mentioning, but also to help them to have a tool that is a starting point for measuring their ESG performance and also improving management, their sustainability issues. The environmental, it was mentioned already, climate related. If I am a small agriculture exposed to climate risk, my production may be heavily affected. I need to become aware of those risks. Or as other industry and other SMEs need to become aware of other issues they face, such as pollution, water, environmental issues in general, or the workforce health and safety, human rights, and so on. So through this, we also see as the second objective of the standard, which is at the same level as the first, that this would support their competitive growth and also enhance their resilience. So those are the two very important features and objectives of the VSME. It was said already, but important to repeat, it has been designed, the standard, for micro, so up to 10 employees, very small company, and then for small and medium-sized undertakings, so up to 250 employees. Meaning that we have followed a very strong principle of proportionality in the design of the standard, with extremely simplified language and also with a flexible approach. The flexibility, which we can see later, is also coming through the modularity while maintaining the overall ESRS consistency. Coming to the next slide, and a little bit still of words on the process we have followed. First of all, we wanted to ensure the conceptual coherence of the SME with ESRS at 1. And also wanted to have a standalone document that could be and provide a simple guidance as starting from a kind of a white sheet of paper. So, of course, we had analyzed the frameworks available at the time, very few for SMEs ESG reporting. But the most important point was to build in the standard this market needs, and to make sure that the standard would fit and focus on the user needs. So we have analyzed questionnaires that were available at the time, containing those requests for ESG information addressed to the SME clients, questionnaires from banks or from heads of supply chains or consortium of both, developed at national level by association, again, consortium, or even rating agencies, hence representing a very high number of SMEs. We estimate it was covering about 26,000 SMEs, and then around 700 banks and 450 corporates. So those questionnaires were really an important basis for us to analyze what were the needs and the most recurring requests that we could find for SMEs clients or suppliers. Then the other assumption we have made was that the sustainable finance legislation was an important source for ESG data point requests. But this was not only the source for lenders or investors. Those ESG and sustainable finance data requests were also used by the large corporates to manage their procurement or the ESG profile of their suppliers. So they became well-established data point that were going beyond the sustainable finance legislation. Of course, we have tested those options and those assumptions in our process. We have had very numerous meetings and workshops with SMEs associations of users, again, banks, investors, large corporates. We have also established at the start of our work on VSME and the SME community. We have benchmarked, as I explained before, other initiatives, and then, of course, analyzed those existing questionnaires. We went through the technical process as usual with our technical expert group and board at EFRAG to come with the first exposure draft that was exposed for public consultation last year. And we received about 500 responses to the public consultation, including as well a large number of SMEs, but also of business counterparts that have really tested the standard. So we have conducted field tests. That was a very enriching process because we could really test the standard and understand what were the challenges, what were the most difficult data points, but also the most needed data points on the user side. After this process, we have finalized the standard that was delivered to the Commission as a technical advice in December 2024. The package also included the cost-benefit analysis. That was also an important element of this process, and helped us also to take certain decisions for changes in the final version of the standard. And then, of course, we also have the basis for conclusions that explain how certain decisions were taken, certain standard setting options were chosen. So if we conclude on the work that we have carried out, we have the standard you can see delivered to the Commission last year. We have the consultation field test, the package as just mentioned, but also we have accompanied this with educational videos to make it easier for especially SMEs to better understand and capture the content. And we have created a VSME ecosystem. We will cover this part, so the VSME ecosystem, in the next webinar. So we won't go in more details today, but it's important to mention it already now, as it is an important part of our work. And it was also a request stemming from the process that I just described. So the public consultation field test emphasized the need for further support if the VSME was to be a success. I emphasize that being it a market-led and a voluntary standard, market acceptance is key. And for market acceptance to really take shape, these additional resources and support through the ecosystem was considered really key. Then we come at the last point. So sorry, not just one step back on the previous slide. After this work, the European Commission has adopted the VSME as the European recommendation. This was released at the end of July 2025, so indeed very recent. Basically, the recommendation totally reflects with very minor changes the content of the EFRAG technical advice, which was once again considered a good balance and compromise between the user needs and the preparer's capabilities. This recommendation is available in all EU official languages, as it was already mentioned. And what is important, and I want to highlight this before we move on, is that the recommendation targets three populations. Who are they? One is the SMEs, so the preparers. And the recommendation invites them to use the VSME as the reference framework to report on their sustainability performance, report to their business counterpart, or report publicly. Second population, this, by the way, also includes the SMEs from third countries, which are also mentioned in the recommendation. Second population, second target are the users. So the banks, investors, the heads of value chain, so the value chain counterparts of SMEs, recommending them to use the VSME standard as a source of ESG information from their SME clients or SME suppliers. So in other words, inviting them to replace current uncoordinated requests with VSME. And the third population is the member states. So the recommendation invites the member states to promote and facilitate the adoption of the VSME in their national communities, also by supporting and establishing tools that can support the VSME adoption, in particular the digital aspect of the VSME adoption. So tools and platforms that can really help the uptake through the online solution and digital solution. Now we can move to the next slide and conclude this first part of the presentation. And this is by zooming in on this modular approach. I said that this was a key concept, the modularity, because we wanted to cater for very small, so micro enterprise, but also for the small and the medium size. So to do that, we needed to have an approach that would be modular and that would gradually help them to take up and take on the VSME. We have modified the final version of the standard by simplifying it. Very concretely, we have removed one module that was the policy action and target module that was really considered the most difficult one for SMEs. And we have inserted the disclosure on those narrative aspects in the new basic and comprehensive module, accompanying it by a sort of semi-narrative disclosure that helps SMEs to understand whether they have to report such policy action and targets, yes or no, if they have it, and then to give a brief description according to the sustainability topics of VSME in a kind of tabular format that really helps and guides the report. So this was the main change that we have introduced in the final standard. Second big change was the deletion of the materiality principle from VSME. Also another key challenge, it was perceived really not feasible by SMEs in particular, by the really small one, but also not reliable for the users. So even the users consider that the materiality analysis run by non-mature or not equipped or less equipped companies would not deliver the results that they would need, and hence would be premature, and the cost benefit would not justify the insertion of it in the standard. So we have now the two modules, the basic and the comprehensive. The basic is the entry level for the non-listed SMEs. It is a target for the micro undertaking. I already mentioned the simplicity of the language. In total, we have 11 disclosures in this module, mainly metrics. And then we have the replacement of the materiality principle with the if applicable. So every disclosure, and Lorenzo Mattias will tell you more on that, every disclosure, which is an applicable one, describes the circumstances that trigger the disclosure itself. Very often it has to do with certain sectors where it's recommended that that disclosure is delivered, whether the SME, if the SME is in that sector. You will hear more in the next interventions. In addition to the basic, the SME can also use the comprehensive module. The comprehensive is really aimed at providing more comprehensive information on top of what is already in the basic module. So this is an expansion of the disclosures that are in the basic module. Very often it coincides with the sustainable finance data points, in particular the SFDR Table 1 PI, but also the Pillar 3 ESG from the EBA. But as I said, those are now, and the consultation confirmed this, established proxies for ESG risk management or ESG procurement in general. We have also introduced in this comprehensive module the if applicable concept, and the module contains 9 disclosures. Of course, applying the comprehensive module is not possible without having applied first the basic module. So the basic is a prerequisite for the comprehensive module. I think I will stop here. If you have questions on this part, I'm happy to take them now or later. And I will hand it over to Lorenzo.
All right, thank you, Elisa, and thank you to everyone that has joined. I will now be discussing quickly the basic module, its disclosures, and also then providing, let's say, an actual example of what, from the disclosures of what that specific disclosure contains and entails. So just as a brief overview then, the basic module contains 11 disclosures, of which the first 2, namely B1 and B2, are general information. And then there's 5 environmental disclosures, and 4 on the social side, and 1 on the governance. So again, it encompasses this E, S, and G spectrum, while starting with a more general approach, for example, with B1 on the general information about the undertakings of the company. With B2, it does, let's say, a cross-cutting approach on practices, policies, future initiatives that the SME has or is planning to undertake. And then for the various ESG, we cover the topics which are also which are the same. So I say are in line with the topics from the larger standards, namely climate change, pollution, biodiversity, water, circular economy, resource use, workforce, and as well as the whole business conduct and governance aspect. Within the basic module, there is no focus on affected communities, value chain, or consumers and end users. And on the social side, it stops there at own workforce. Now, in that central column in that table, you can see there's series numbers. These reflect the number of times that the content of those disclosures were mentioned in the questionnaires, that the 12 questionnaires that Elisa spoke about at the start of the presentation. So essentially that column explains where we fetched this concept, where we fetched this type of disclosure, information, and it shows how important it was in existing questionnaires prior to the VSME. And then as an additional point, which is rather important, as Elisa mentioned, there is no materiality, so there's this if applicable concept. And on that column on the right, you may see there which disclosures have an if applicable concept to them, and which other ones have either a shall or a may. So I'll quickly show that through the examples in a second, but essentially within the same disclosure, there may be a paragraph or a subparagraph of that disclosure that is to be reported on in all cases. Then another subparagraph or paragraph which is only if applicable. And then there's also, in let's say fewer number of cases, may disclosures, which are essentially even further optionality. Now, if we take a look at specific example on disclosure B3, this disclosure covers both energy consumption, and then on the next slide we'll see GHG emissions. But essentially here, this disclosure is, this paragraph especially, is on energy consumption in megawatt hours. It is a shall disclosure, meaning that it has to be reported on. And here we're asking for a breakdown of the consumption of electricity and also fuels. So fuels that also covers gas, but also other fuels such as petrol and diesel and so on. So this is a rather straightforward disclosure. As you can see on the right, the idea of this disclosure is really to obtain this information from essentially bills and invoices. Electricity and gas bills will often be have some type of parameter, whether directly in megawatt hours or through liters and so on, or meters cubed. So this is all information that SMEs generally should have through their own existing databases. If the SMEs do not have the megawatt hour equivalent, through our VSME online digital template, we have included a fuel converter, which essentially allows you to convert various types of fuels, whether in liters, meters cubed, and so on, to the megawatt hours. So that's really, again, an additional material that we've provided, and we'll be able to talk about this in the next seminar that we will have. But again, the idea here is really to start with the consumption of energy based on data that the SMEs have. And then if we move, yes, to the next slide on greenhouse gas emissions. Here, again, this is a shall data point. And again, this therefore applies to all the micros, the small and the medium, just like all other disclosures in the basic module. And the focus here is only on scope 1 and 2. Scope 3 here is not included. And to help, again, SMEs calculate their emissions, we recently put on our website and also released a report on mapping of existing tools for to calculate GHG emissions. We'll discuss this further again in the next seminar, but essentially already on our website there is a list of tools that EFRAG does not endorse, it has not done a quality check, but tools that declare, let's say, a self-alignment to the GHG protocol and so on, that therefore the SMEs may use to calculate their Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. And of these, particularly one had, let's say, a global coverage, meaning that it applied to countries in the EU, but also countries outside the EU. And that might be of particular interest to today's audience. So that's essentially on an example on how to embrace this disclosure on energy and greenhouse gas emissions. Now, if we take a look at the next slide on general information on workforce, here, this disclosure is composed of two types of data points. The first one being a shall, so providing information on the type of employment contracts, the gender, and the country of employment contracts. Again, this should be rather straightforward for SMEs and within their own databases again. And then there is an if applicable. So on that paragraph 40, if the undertaking has more than 50 employees, then it shall disclose. So this is an example of an if applicable. So only if the undertaking has more than employees, then it becomes an obligation to report. And in this case, for example, it's asking to report on the turnover rate. So the number of employees who left during a year divided by the average number of employees during that same reporting period, put as a percentage, so times by 100. So essentially, this is, I think, a very good example of what an if applicable would look like. I think this gives overall a wrap up on the basic module and just a few brief examples of what those disclosures actually look like. And now I think I'll pass it on to Matthias for the comprehensive module.
Yes, thank you, Lorenzo. So if we move to the comprehensive module, as Elisa mentioned before, the module provides disclosure to address, let's say, in a comprehensive way, the information needs of the undertaking's business partners, which include, for example, investors, banks, corporate clients, etc. And of course, this information is provided on top of the basic module. And as Elisa mentioned before, the information comes and basically reflects the financial market participant and corporate clients' respective obligations under, for example, the SFDR regulation. As you can see, we have that the comprehensive module includes 9 disclosures. We have the first 2 disclosures, which are related to the general information. So C1 is related to the business module and sustainability related initiatives. It's basically requiring the undertaking to disclose the key elements of the business model and strategy, such as, for example, a description of the significant groups of products and services offered, then a description of the significant markets in which the undertaking operates in, the main business relationship, and of course, if the strategy has key elements that relate to sustainability, then a brief description of those elements. Then we have also included this the second disclosure, so C2, which is basically a continuation of the B2 that Lorenzo mentioned before in the basic module. So if the undertaking answers to B2 in the basic module through a simple checklist, saying that it has a practice, policy, or future initiative that covers certain sustainability issues that we mentioned in Appendix B of the standard, then if it reports on the comprehensive module, it can provide a description. So it's a bit more narrative, and for this reasoning, it was included in the comprehensive module. And of course, within this disclosure, the undertaking may indicate the most senior level within its employees that it's accountable for implementing the policies when this has been determined, of course, by the undertaking. Then, moving to the environmental disclosures of this module, we have firstly a consideration when reporting on GHG emissions. This is the scope 3 that Lorenzo was mentioning before, as under B3 in the basic module, scope 3 is not requested. And it was decided during the various consultation and feedback that we have received to include scope 3 in the comprehensive only as a consideration. So it's basically depending on the type of activities that are carried out by the undertaking, it may be appropriate for the undertaking to disclose scope 3 emissions, and this should be based on the GHG protocol scope 3 categories. And of course, it solely depends if the undertaking already reports on scope 3 emissions, and if this is the case, then it can report it under scope 1 and together with scope 1 and scope 2 emissions under B3. Then moving into the actual disclosure, so the actual environmental disclosures, we have the C3 and C4. C3 concerns the GHG reduction targets. So here the undertaking, of course, we're under the if applicable principle once again, as the undertaking is required to disclose the GHG reduction targets only if it has established them. And the same applies to for the climate transition plan. So in this case, it's limited to undertake if the undertaking operates in high climate impact sectors.
Matthias,
Yes,
sorry, there is a kind request from our interpreters to speak more slowly, if possible.
of course,
Thank
sure.
you.
Sure. So we move to C4, which concerns climate risks. It's basically, again, an if applicable disclosure, as it applies only if the undertaking has identified climate-related hazards and climate-related transition events. And if this is the case, then it shall briefly describe such climate-related hazards or transition events, and also disclose the time horizon, for example, or whether the undertaking as climate change adaptation actions for any of these climate-related hazards and transition events that have been identified. Now, moving to the social disclosures within the comprehensive module, we have C5, which is basically additional general workforce characteristics. Again, here we have two great examples of, if applicable, disclosures as which are combined also with may, so it's even more soft. And on the first case, we have that the undertaking may disclose the female to male ratio at management level for the reporting period. And secondly, the undertaking may disclose the number of those self-employed without personnel who are exclusively working for the undertaking. Now, moving to C6 and C7, these disclosures underwent a true simplification process from the public consultation, as they were deemed to be too difficult. As such, we modified them in a yes or no format. In short, in C6, the undertaking is asked whether it has a code of conduct or human right policy for its own workforce. And if the undertaking answers yes, then it needs to specify if it covers, for example, child labor, forced labor, human trafficking, discrimination, etc. The undertaking in this case is also asked whether it has a complaint handling mechanism for its own workforce. Again, it's in a yes or no format. Moving to C7, here the disclosure is about severe negative human rights incidents. Again, within a yes or no format, the undertaking needs to disclose whether it has confirmed incidents in its own workforce related to child labor, forced labor, human trafficking, discrimination, or other. Within this disclosure, the undertaking is also asked if it is aware of any confirmed incidents involving workers in the value chain, affected communities, consumers, and end users. And of course, if the answer is positive, then it should specify. Moving to the governance metrics within the comprehensive module, we have C8, which is revenues from certain activities and exclusion from EU reference benchmarks. According to paragraph 63, if the undertaking is active in one of the following sectors, it shall disclose the related revenues derived from these activities. So we have controversial weapons, the cultivation and production of tobacco within the fossil fuel, so coal, oil, and gas, and lastly, chemical production, in this case, only if the undertaking is a manufacturer of pesticides and other agrochemical products. Concerning the EU reference benchmark part, we have that the undertaking shall disclose whether it is excluded from any EU reference benchmarks that are aligned with the Paris Agreement. And there is a specific list that guides the undertakings in order to understand whether they're excluded or not from this EU reference benchmarks. The last disclosure of the comprehensive module concerns the gender diversity ratio in the governance body. It's very straightforward. So if the undertaking has a governance body in place, then it shall disclose the related gender diversity ratio. I think this concludes the comprehensive module deep dive. And I think, Svetlana, I will pass to you the word such that if there are any questions, we may go ahead and answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, colleague, for such a comprehensive presentation. Indeed, it appears to be that the standard is very clear and straightforward, but of course the devil is in details, and we need to see also from a practical perspective. I see there is one question in our Q&A box, but maybe we can start with a more general question. And if you could you please clarify the key differences in terms of principles between the VSME standard and the full set of ESRS. And just to be clear, when we speak about a full set of ESRS, now we mean standards as published by the European Commission. However, if you expect or if you would like to highlight some differences between the VSME standard and full ESRS as amended and published by EFRAG, please let's be clear from this perspective also.
Yes, thank you, Svetlana. I think some of the differences I have already mentioned in the presentation, meaning that probably the most important difference is the mandatory let me start again, is the double materiality analysis that is the core of the ESRS, being the ESRS set one or the simplified one, and that is absent in the VSME. Also, the principle of if applicable which is, if you want, a simplification to a certain degree of the materiality principle, is not present in the ESRS. Maybe in the simplified version there is some notion of applicability, but it's not certainly a core principle. And then, of course, the guided disclosure that I mentioned on the narrative part, which is really, I would say there is an important dimension of alignment, because of course we request a short description along the full range of the sustainability issues, which is exactly the same as the one in the ESRS. So this gives a lot again of flexibility and possibility to cover even on the social aspect the issues where we have no metrics, including the workers in value chain or affected communities where there are no metrics, but still the possibility to cover that in a form of the description. But certainly, it's a lesser extent compared to the ESRS. Also, the value chain, of course, we have no metrics. Also, Matthias explained the scope 3 is a consideration only for certain sector. So it's in a comprehensive module. Even in this case, we came to the conclusion that it would be premature to introduce this metric for SMEs, but it would be important to give a signal that in certain sectors that we list in the standard, it would be appropriate to provide this disclosure. So it's a very light touch approach, which is of course very different from what we have in ESRS. And in general, we have no other metrics with value chain dimension, but of course, as I mentioned before, in the description of the policies or action or the targets, it's also possible to give an explanation of whether they include the value chain. So there is also this dimension that is covered, but on a lesser extent. So I would say those are the main differences: the narrative part and the DMA and the value chain. But otherwise, there is a lot of consistency also in the preference for the consolidated approach, in the request of when reporting through the basic module to report to the full standard, or other the link with the financial statement, which are also present in VSME. Of course, it's a more proportionate approach, but still very similar with those important differences. And if I may, I would also like, and I think this is part also of the differences, to mention that another or two more important elements of VSME, which also are different compared to the ESRS. Of course, the fact that it's voluntary, as you see, and I stressed this point earlier, we can the undertaking may decide to only use it as a source for bilateral exchange of information with the counterparts, or to publish the report, which of course for the ESRS being a mandatory reporting, the only possibility is to release the full report. And then another element is the fact that in the VSME, you can use the basic and then only parts of the comprehensive module. So this is also very, very flexible, and it was meant to give the opportunity to gradually increase, the level of reporting. And also in this case, it's, a flexibility which is proper to the VSME compared to the ESRS. But then in VSME, coming again to this rough comparison, in VSME, we also have kind of the entity-specific principles. So you can also top up your disclosure with other disclosure which are not listed in the standard, but that are KPIs typical, for example, of your sector, recognized or widely used in that sector. So this is also in a sense a good comparison with the ESRS, where we have a similar principle. I think I covered a little bit, a very superficial and quick kind of comparison, but yeah, it's an interesting aspect indeed.
Yeah, thank you, Elisa. And we also admit that if an SME decides to publish a sustainability report prepared based on the VSME standard, they can also decide to have this report audited if financial statements, for example, are part of are subject of mandatory or statutory audit. But again, this is a voluntary decision. If the report is published, they may decide also to publish and audit the report.
Yeah, the EU recommendation explicitly excludes the auditing, but I think this was an important element for the European SMEs that were really concerned about the auditing element. Again, we are talking about the micro and the small SME. We are not talking about the new threshold, but of course, being voluntary, it's not excluded to have also the auditing in a voluntary approach.
And maybe just a follow-up question from the chat. Please clarify the impact of the omnibus on the VSME content.
So yeah, well, it's really not much up to EFRAG, but it's really more in the hands of the co-legislator. I can, however, refer to what the Speaker of the European Commission said during our event. We had an outreach event on VSME last Monday, on the 6th of October. And by the way, there is also a recording or soon available on our website. And what he explained is that after the conclusion of the omnibus negotiation, there would be a formal process involving the consultation for the delegated act, because once again, the delegated act in the omnibus proposal is to enforce the value chain cap. So it's strictly connected to limit the request, to impose a limit to the value chain partners in the request that they address to their SMEs counterpart. So that's why there is a delegated act in the omnibus. And what the Commission representative explained is that this formal process for the delegated act will start, of course, involving the EU bodies and the member states, because, you know, in the CSRD, they have to consult 7 EU bodies when they issue the delegated act, and also the member states, followed by a 4-week public consultation and then the translation. So the entire process after the negotiation could take around 5 months. And as said in the omnibus, this delegated act will be based on existing VSME. And what the Commission has said is that it may have small adaptations. So for the moment, that's the intention. But honestly, I am just referring because it's really not the EFRAG, an EFRAG decision or mandate.
Yeah, there is one more general question in the chat. How can non-EU country use the VSME standard, promote its use to eligible SMEs in their jurisdictions, adapt and publish local version? I think this is not a problem, and non-EU countries can use the standard, but maybe you want to elaborate on this also.
Yeah, to be honest, we have many non-EU countries looking at the SME, even farther than EU, even in Asia or third countries. We have, and this is also interesting, an analysis of the OECD that is let's say recommending to governments also to establish frameworks for ESG SME reporting and analyzes various existing framework, coming as well to an analysis of common most frequent data point that may constitute a starting point for this framework. Of course, the VSME is quite prominent in this analysis. So this is to say that whether it may need adaptation, but it's a very solid basis for a framework even beyond the European landscape.
In fact, they can decide to develop national standards based on VSME, for example. It's not an issue.
Well, the idea is to not to fragment, but to standardize. So the more we standardize and we don't replicate, otherwise we fall again in the duplication.
It's also the idea of cross-border access to finance that the Commission very much promotes in various programs. So in order to facilitate that, you need to have a common way. So a bank in one country should then be able to rely on what comes from another country. Well, that's the idea. If this will work out is another question. But if everybody is doing its own national thing, then for sure it will not work.
Yeah, and what we can add, we see on the market again, because we are really monitoring what's happening in the market, that many of those consortia that are already using the SME, cover value chain, which are very broad. So they go from maybe the region of the limit at the border with Europe, but also farther away. And in a way, they are kind of, I use maybe the wrong word, allow me to use it, imposing the VSME also to the value chains, which are, as I said, regionally very mixed and extended. So through this market standard, we see that there is really a development of VSME, which in a way should then not lead to the development of many other national standard. Of course, the language is the first thing. So many, for example, of those platforms, we will come to that next week, but are translating in those multiple languages to adapt to the composition of the value chain, the VSME. So that's certainly the feature, the key feature. But yes, I hope that helps.
Yeah. 2 additional questions in our Q&A box. You already have somehow covered this, but since we still have time, let me ask these questions as well. So the Commission has advised that the VSME will serve as a basis for voluntary reporting by companies employing 250 up to the thresholds for mandatory reporting, which looks likely to be 1,000 now. Some believe it should be a subset or of amended ESRSs. Does EFRAG have a view on what this standard should look like and where to start set is VSMEs or ESRS? A bottom-up modular approach would suggest VSME. And as a follow-up, next question is a follow-up question. Is it realistic to expect that there will be a simplified ESRSs or baby ESRSs to cover the category of companies from 250 up to 1,000 employees threshold?
Yeah, I think this is the 2 questions. Indeed, I think they are the same, more or less, if I interpret well. As I explained it previously, this is really in the hands of the Commission. From what we heard during our conference, there is no intention to develop, and at least EFRAG was not asked to develop a standard, a mini ESRS or a VSME plus for the category 250-1,000. So for the moment, the Commission intends to use the VSME and follow the process I explained you with these 5 months. No. So, of course, depending on the input of this consultation, the standard may change. But here we are in the space of defining the delegated act for the value chain. Now, in the space of voluntary reporting for companies which are larger, so let's say 500 or above, well, technically we can say that VSME would be quite reductive. We said that it's been developed for smaller companies, much smaller companies. And here again, I can echo what the Commission also said, that for those type of companies, 500 plus, one option is also to, I say 500 just to give an idea of size, but one option on the table is also to use EFRS, simplified EFRS. So we are in the voluntary space. So at that point, there is VSME, there is VSME plus, there is ESRS, VSME plus, VSME to which maybe companies may add ESRS data point or materiality. There is the possibility to use ESRS simplified. Of course, the more we stay in, once again, not to multiply and create deviation from existing standard, the better it is. So wherever will the delegated act would land, that would be then the standard. And then voluntary use of the ESRS simplified is still possible. I would say that the two would be possible.
And one more question from Albania, I think, but also around the scope and applicability of the standard. Would you recommend the possibility of proposing VSME standard as mandatory under national regulations for non-EU countries, where the majority of companies are not subject to obligatory reporting? So again, our understanding is that this standard can be part of national legislation if regulators and policymakers decide so. But again, if you want to elaborate on this.
It's very political,
Yeah, it's not easy to know, and also non-EU is way part of the omnibus proposals, and we don't know yet what the outcome will be and what the criteria will be, the thresholds. Obviously, on the VSME standard, it's a voluntary. As well, there's something that's voluntary. You basically can do what you want.
Yeah. If a national government decides that it can be a good, starting point for in a regime where there is no yet any no financial or sustainability reporting at all, any legislation. The options are indeed to look at either VSME or the revised ESRS, I would say. But definitely the suggestion is to start with VSME because, not for a mandatory reporting in general, for companies that are just approaching the ESG reporting, the VSME offers a very, very good starting point, and then potentially grow and land on the simplified ESRS once they will be finalized.
I think we have one more question, maybe from a practical perspective. How may non-EU SMEs benefit from using the VSME standards, for instance, help them win contracts to supply large EU companies, attract sustainable finance from the EU? Can we admit that there could be some benefits if we apply a company, an SME apply the VSME standard?
I think so. I think you would still be in the same value chain or with the same banks and so on. So if you come from another country and you can say that you report on the basis of VSME, that will be bring added value. Now, but there may be other factors that people weigh. Of course, it's the VSME, your sustainability activities reporting is one thing, but there are other factors for an investment decision or for a banking loan decision that play a role. I don't know what you want to add.
No, for sure. What we can say is that in the VSME, we have captured the key indicators that either banks, European banks, and European large companies want to see from their supply chain, or even member state may have include some of those requirements in the public tender. So if you are able to report this data, of course, you are in principle more attractive to those banks, to those partners in the value chain, or to participate in this call for tenders where ESG criteria are requested. So yes, of course, it should in principle help to profile also non-EU SMEs.
And if I may, the main purpose, as we said, of the VSME is to provide sustainability information to banks, to business partners, so to provide ESG information to another party. But that's not the only, let's say, purpose of the standard as well. There's also other purposes, and well, one of them is also to get SMEs to start their sustainability journey. And whether the SMEs in the EU or outside of the EU, the concepts remain the same. And so I think it's also a good opportunity to start on that basis as not a management standard, because it's not a management standard, but to get SMEs in the perspective of sustainability and acquainted with the topics as well.
So colleagues, I see we have one more question in the Q&A box. Can the VSME standard be leveraged and used by non-EU based suppliers to respond to the request from the EU purchasers under the due diligence directive?
The due diligence is a very...
it's not clear under the current as published.
Well, obviously, SMEs are far away now because they increased, at least in the proposals that the Parliament has adopted, this all to 5,000. So I must say, EFRAG is not very much involved in the CSDD, only where it has a direct impact on some of the ESRS, simplified ESRS, but well, under the control of Elisa, I don't believe that that is related anywhere to the VSME standard, as far as I can see. But we are only, well, I would say indirectly involved in that where it has relevance for what now is then simplified ESRS. So, but given the thresholds and the increase of the thresholds, it seems that it's not very relevant for SMEs. It's at least my interpretation. Again, this is all level 1 legislation, like Elisa just explained. So that is not where EFRAG is active, only as soon as it has implications for the level 2, as we call it, legislation, so the ESRS, the preparation of the standards, then we are involved.
Yeah, I mean, there are some light, very light, but not even we can call due diligence because it's quite light in the VSME. So even, I mean, the European recommendation refer a little bit to this, but yeah, I think Saskia, framed it well. That it's a bit outsider.
One more question from Ukraine. I admit it's too early to speak about VSME based sustainability reporting, but still there is a question. Do you happen to have any real examples, real reports based on VSME standard?
Well, we are starting to collect them and we are monitoring a little bit how it's developing. This is really the idea. We will tell you more of this this forum that we have set up, on the ecosystem through these different levers that we use in the ecosystem. So yes, it's the first reports are being produced, and hopefully we will have the opportunity as well to start monitoring how this develop, identify good practices, and build also on this. Yeah.
If I may, if I may add, I think the VSME digital template of which we will also speak in the next session will also help us gather, as Lisa mentioned, those sustainability reports in a even more standardized manner. But I don't want to spoiler anything. We will talk about it in the next session.
Yeah, thank you, Matthias. Colleagues, I think that we managed to answer all questions so far. Any final thoughts or remarks before we close?
Not so much from our side. I think just to say thank you again for making this, giving us the opportunity to tell about the VSME and the importance of the VSME standard, also for countries outside the EU. I think given the questions that we received, it seems to be that at least our message has come through, so we are quite delighted with that. And like, well, I think each of the VSME team mentioned in the next session, they will give much more insight in all the practical tools, also this VSME ecosystem, what we call this ESRS Knowledge Hub, and so on. So they will give you further insight, which makes it more practical and concrete, I guess. Although many of you are regulators, so perhaps the standard as such is of interest, but it would also be very good if you could promote the tools. Obviously, all what we do is in English, but yeah, you can be freely translated.
Yeah, and depending if regulators in these countries are interested indeed to adopt the VSME standard and promote, then we can discuss, and maybe under EASSURE regional program, some support can be provided by the WorldBank, so to promote the standard at the national level in non-EU or EU accession countries. So thank you very much, Elisa, Lorenzo, and Matthias, and Saskia, for your great contribution today. I'm pretty sure participants will join me with a big round of virtual applauses to you. And dear friends, dear participants, thank you very much for your active participation today, for your questions. Next session, as colleagues mentioned, will go deeper into practical perspective, and we admit it will be interesting. And again, you will have the possibility to ask your questions. So thank you. Have a nice day, a nice evening, and see you next week. Bye bye.